The silence in the command center was oppressive, thick enough to suffocate. Outside, the expanse of space was nothing but a dark void, interrupted only by the faint glimmer of distant stars. Commander Viktor Kessler stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the holographic map unfolding before him. The projection shimmered, detailing the positions of enemy fleets, scattered like broken shards across the galactic grid. He clenched his fist, the cold metal of his gauntlet biting into his skin. A soft click echoed through the chamber as a subordinate stepped forward, his voice steady but edged with unease. "Sir, the scouts have confirmed. The Empress is preparing for a full-scale assault." Kessler didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, working through the countless calculations, the strategies long rehearsed in simulations. He'd seen this before, conquering empires that underestimated their foes, blind to the power of humanity's resolve. Yet this was different. The stakes were higher. The Empress was no ordinary adversary, and humanity had no intention of bowing down. "Let her come," Kessler muttered, his voice cold and precise. His eyes didn't leave the map as he adjusted the coordinates. "We'll make her regret underestimating us." Behind him, the hum of data streams filled the air, the quiet whispers of terminals processing at light speed. The room smelled of sterile metal and faint traces of ionized air, a subtle reminder of the vastness of space outside. The sharp clack of Kessler's boots echoed on the polished floor as he moved, his steps deliberate. His officers were scattered across the room, focused on their stations. No one spoke unless they had to. Tension was thick, yet under the pressure, they thrived. Kessler's gaze flickered briefly to the faces of his crew. Each one of them was a link in the chain, an integral part of the war machine. He couldn't afford to lose any of them. Not now. Not when they were so close. But the reality of it stung. Their chances were slim, the odds stacked against them. Yet they had something the Empress didn't: ingenuity. And a few surprises up their sleeves. A new message flashed on the screen, its red alert lighting up the dark room. Kessler's sharp eyes scanned the data. The Empress had just ordered her first strike. The time for waiting was over. "Prepare the fleet," Kessler barked. "We hit them first. Make sure they never see us coming." The moment the words left his mouth, the entire room moved with synchronized precision. Officers at their stations, their fingers flying across screens, issued orders. The metallic clinks of armor being secured echoed softly in the background as Kessler turned away from the map. The air around him grew heavier, charged with the electricity of impending war. But his expression remained unchanged. This would be the battle that defined them. Victory wasn't just a possibility. It was an inevitability. And with that certainty, the doors to the command center slid shut behind him. The command center was a flurry of motion as Kessler stepped out, the tension thickening the air like an incoming storm. Officers were already taking their positions, each one silently anticipating the order that would send them into the heart of the conflict. The atmosphere was sharp, filled with the tang of cooling metal and the faint buzz of systems coming online. Kessler's boots clicked decisively as he walked towards the central terminal, where his tactical officer stood poised, ready to input commands. "Status report," Kessler demanded, his voice low but firm, as his fingers brushed against the cool surface of the console. The officer glanced up, eyes shadowed with the weight of their mission. "All systems operational, sir. The fleet is in position. We're ready to deploy on your command." Kessler nodded, his gaze focused on the projection in front of him. The enemy fleet was closing in, their path predicted by the most accurate intelligence their scouts had gathered. The map of the galaxy pulsed faintly under his eyes, a steady rhythm that matched his own quickening pulse. His hand hovered over the controls, the warmth from the panel slipping into his fingertips, yet his mind was far from the present. "Sir, the Empress is escalating," the officer continued, bringing Kessler's attention back to the situation. The intensity in his voice was sharp, the urgency unmistakable. "She's launching her first wave." Kessler's jaw tightened. The Empress had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back. That mistake would cost her. He pressed a button, watching as the map shifted, revealing the hidden fleet of human supercarriers, scattered across the galaxy like a finely tuned orchestra. The real battle was about to begin, and humanity had one advantage: stealth. "Initiate the cloaking sequence," Kessler ordered, his eyes never leaving the map. "Let's see how well she handles a shadow." In the darkened control room, a sudden shift in the air signaled the beginning of something monumental. The lights dimmed slightly, the sharp clicks of keys turning into a soft cascade of urgent action. Officers moved fluidly, securing their stations, voices hushed but steady as they passed along the order. Kessler watched the ship's systems engage, the pulse of the hidden fleet now synchronized with the distant hum of impending destruction. The crew was silent now, only the clattering of fingers across terminals and the occasional murmured instruction breaking the stillness. Each one of them understood the gravity of the situation. Kessler's focus sharpened, his senses heightened. The coolness of the air seemed to press against his skin, a constant reminder that, despite their advantages, nothing was certain. The sharp scent of recycled air and processed food lingered faintly, a reminder that even in the face of war, life continued, ticking forward in the quiet moments before the storm. Another alert flashed before him, a message from the fleet. The first supercarrier was ready. The waiting game was over. "Send them in," Kessler said, his voice steady, though a fire burned in his gut. "Let's give her a taste of what's coming." As the orders spread across the fleet, a moment of stillness settled. The officers gathered their focus, faces set in grim determination. Then, without another word, the fleet moved. The massive ships slipped into the shadows of the galaxy, invisible to the oncoming enemy, their engines now silent, their presence nothing more than a whisper in the void. The Empress would never see them coming. Kessler stood still for a moment, feeling the weight of the mission settle into his bones. The enemy might be powerful, but humanity's resolve was sharper than any blade, and soon the Empress would know that she had made the most dangerous mistake of all. The stillness of the command center was replaced by a quiet intensity as the fleet slipped deeper into the shadows of space. Kessler stood at the heart of it all, his breath steady despite the storm brewing outside. The Empress had no idea what was coming, no idea that humanity had made its move, hidden in plain sight, waiting like a predator in the dark. The officers around him were tense but focused, their fingers moving with practiced precision. In the air, a faint electric charge prickled the skin, a feeling of anticipation, of something massive about to unfold. "Status?" Kessler's voice was low, cutting through the silence like a blade. His gaze flicked between the crew, the map, the projections. His heart pulsed in time with the fleet's movements, every calculation running through his mind. The communications officer spoke first, her voice a tight thread. "All ships are cloaked. The first wave of supercarriers is in position, sir. We're undetected." The words were both a relief and a challenge. The real test was still ahead. Kessler's eyes narrowed. "Good, but don't get comfortable. We've only just begun." Around him the officers nodded, their faces bathed in the pale glow of their screens, the weight of their task sitting heavy on their shoulders. The room smelled faintly of recycled air, the sterile scent of the ship's core systems mixing with the sharp tang of sweat from nervous anticipation. They knew the enemy would strike soon. This was their moment to make a statement. The first blast of light pierced the darkness outside, a warning. It wasn't the Empress's fleet yet, but a scouting force, a band of ships sent to probe humanity's defenses. Kessler's fingers tightened on the armrests of his command chair as the first ripple of tension passed through the room. His mind already ran ahead, calculating the enemy's approach, the timing. "Prepare the interceptors. Full engagement." His voice was a command, sharp and immediate. The deck shuddered as the response teams activated, the ship vibrating slightly beneath his feet. His senses heightened, the cold metal of the chair against his back, the hum of systems preparing for battle, the growing silence in the command center that preceded the chaos. Every officer moved with precision, the sounds of boots on the floor and fingers tapping keys, like the synchronized beats of a drum. Kessler could feel it all, the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that every decision made here would ripple outward, affecting the lives of thousands. "Lock onto targets," Kessler ordered, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who knew the battlefield as well as he knew his own skin. The faint whisper of the targeting systems came alive, the numbers rising on the holoscreen, tracking the scout ship's movements. The officers didn't speak. They didn't need to. Each of them was a part of a larger machine, each motion in sync with the next. But Kessler could see it in their faces, the moment of tension just before the floodgate of action opened. He could feel the sweat beading on his own brow, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The Empress's scouts were too close now, too close to the fleet. A split second could decide everything. The first wave of interceptors was launched. The fleet's massive forms lurked in the vast Black Sea, invisible to the untrained eye. But now the veil of secrecy was lifting. A flurry of missiles erupted from the human fleet, trailing through the void like sharp arrows cutting through the dark. In the silence, the chaos of their destruction felt oddly serene, the only sound the rush of data streaming in, confirming hits. But Kessler's heart still raced. He wasn't ready to celebrate yet. The real battle hadn't started. "Status on the Empress's fleet?" he demanded, never taking his eyes off the unfolding assault. "Still moving forward, but the lead scouts have been neutralized. They're picking up speed, sir," came the quick reply. "Let them come," Kessler muttered. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing harder against his chest, the tension coiling like a spring ready to snap. His mind moved faster than the simulations, preparing for the inevitable. The Empress wasn't going to back down. She would strike with everything she had, and humanity would be waiting. The battle had begun, but it was far from what Kessler had anticipated. The fleet moved with the quiet grace of a predator, the massive ships concealed in the deep darkness of space, waiting. He stood in the command center, his fingers clenched tightly around the armrests, his mind calculating the movements of both his forces and the enemy. His officers were efficient, their faces etched with focus, each one locked in their own station, their senses attuned to the ever-shifting battlefront. The metallic taste of tension lingered in the air, sharp and biting. He could feel the energy coursing through the ship, the low vibrations beneath his feet, the subtle shifting of pressure as the fleet adjusted its position. Every small motion was part of a greater design, one that Kessler had spent years perfecting. "Enemy forces closing in, sir," the communications officer said, her voice tight but controlled. "They are preparing to engage. The Empress's fleet is right behind them. We need to act now." Kessler nodded, but his mind raced ahead, piecing together the final elements of his strategy. The Empress's scouts had been easily dispatched, but they had only been a diversion. Her real power was still on its way. He could feel it coming, the weight of it pressing down on his chest like an invisible hand. "Send the signal," Kessler ordered, his voice low and measured. "Activate the decoys." The order echoed throughout the fleet. From the far reaches of the formation, a series of bright flashes erupted across the void, dancing like silent fireworks against the backdrop of stars. The decoys were set into motion, mimicking the signature of human warships, drawing the Empress's attention to false targets. Kessler knew it would only buy them a few precious minutes, but it was enough. The room pulsed with energy as the officers carried out the command with synchronized precision. The soft click of keyboards and the rush of data pouring into the system filled the silence that had hung so heavily moments before. Kessler's eyes flickered to the screens, glowing with information, showing the approaching alien fleet in all its vast and menacing power. The first wave of the Empress's ships appeared on the horizon of the map, moving in formation, their hulls gleaming in the cold, indifferent light of distant stars. The ships were monstrous, massive, calculating, and sure of their superiority. But Kessler wasn't afraid. He knew this was their moment. "Steady," Kessler murmured, his gaze flicking across the room. The officers didn't flinch, their focus unwavering. His own heart beat in rhythm with the incoming enemy, slow and heavy, like the draw of a bowstring before the release. The tension was unbearable, but it was a necessary weight. It was the pressure that turned coal into diamonds. The first wave of missiles screamed through space, their trails of fire cutting through the dark like fiery veins. The decoys flickered, absorbing the majority of the blasts, but Kessler could feel the shift in the air. The Empress's fleet was beginning to react, shifting their course, adapting. It was only a matter of time before they realized the truth. The true targets were still hidden, lying in wait. "Prepare the fleet for full engagement," Kessler said sharply, his voice carrying the gravity of what was to come. "We strike now." The command rippled through the fleet, a wave of readiness sweeping over the officers. The sounds of systems powering up filled the room, the quiet click of weapons systems locking into place, punctuated by the sharp crackle of comms as the fleet confirmed their readiness. Kessler inhaled deeply, his senses sharpening with each passing second. The cool air in the command center tasted like metal, the faint bitterness of stress mixing with the anticipation. Outside, the stars seemed to pulse in time with the fleet's movements, each ship now a shadow in the dark, poised to strike. The room was thick with the weight of the decision, the knowledge that everything hinged on this one moment. It wasn't just strategy anymore. It was survival, and Kessler would be damned if they failed. "Let's show her what humanity is capable of," Kessler said, the words carrying the weight of finality. The air in the room shifted again, the tension thickening as the fleet prepared to unleash hell upon the unsuspecting enemy. The command center was charged with an electricity that was palpable, a thick tension settling in as the fleet prepared for the oncoming strike. Kessler's eyes remained fixed on the monitors, his mind calculating each moment, each move. The room around him had grown still, save for the occasional tapping of fingers on screens and the soft rustling of uniforms. The air was dense with the acrid taste of tension, and the subtle metallic tang of anticipation lingered on his tongue. Every breath felt heavier now, as if each inhale were a measure of time they couldn't afford to waste. "All ships are in position," came the report from the operations officer, her voice sharp with urgency but steady. "The decoys are holding, but the Empress's fleet is getting closer. They've detected the false signals." Kessler nodded, not flinching at the news. This was expected. He hadn't built the decoys for long-term misdirection. They were meant to buy time, nothing more. The real plan was just beginning. "Activate Phase 2, Kessler commanded, his voice steady but full of purpose. "Deploy the disruptors." The officer's hands flew over her controls, the soft click of each key echoing in the otherwise silent room. The disruptors, hidden deep within the fleet, were humanity's trump card. They weren't the typical weapons the Empress's fleet would anticipate, neither lasers nor projectiles, but a carefully engineered system designed to scramble the enemy's sensors and communication systems. The effectiveness of these disruptors had been tested only once and never in a real battle. Outside, in the deep void of space, the first tendrils of the disruptor waves unfurled. They spread silently, invisible but potent, seeping into the alien fleet systems like a poison. The enemy ships, unaware of the unseen threat, continued their march forward. Kessler could feel his pulse quicken, the slight tightening in his chest as he waited for the inevitable reaction. Then, as if on cue, the holographic map before him flickered. For a brief moment, the blue-green light of the alien ships shuddered, and their movements became erratic. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough. Kessler's eyes narrowed, a slight shift in his expression signaling the beginning of the real conflict. The Empress's fleet had fallen into the trap. "They're scrambling," the officer beside him muttered, her fingers tapping furiously on the console. "Sensors are offline. They don't know where we are." Kessler allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The disruptors had worked, but it wasn't enough to win the battle yet. The Empress would regroup, and when she did, she would be even more dangerous. The sound of sharp, anxious breaths filled the room as the officers realized the gravity of what lay ahead. "Get ready for the second wave," Kessler ordered. His eyes flicked to the map, watching as the alien fleet fumbled, trying to regain its composure. His mind raced through the variables, calculating what was next. He could almost feel the weight of the Empress's presence, a threat not yet visible but always looming. As the final pieces of the plan fell into place, Kessler's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, almost imperceptible shift in the air. It was as if the ship had paused just for a moment, holding its breath with him. The crew felt it too, their movements stiffening, their senses tingling. Something was coming. something they weren't prepared for. The cold, sterile air of the command center seemed to close in, the sharp tang of metal now tinged with something darker, heavier. Kessler's fingers tightened around the edge of the console as he looked up at the map again. There, near the edge of their sensor range, a new cluster of ships appeared. This time, they were different, more numerous, more precise. And as the numbers started to shift on the screen, Kessler's gut clenched. The Empress was already countering. The real war was about to begin. The flickering holographic map displayed the unfolding chaos in sharp contrast to the eerie stillness inside the command center. Kessler's eyes tracked the movement of the alien fleet, now reshuffling in response to the Disruptor wave. The map pulsed with red as the Empress's ships struggled to regain their bearings. It was a temporary setback, nothing more. But Kessler knew the real fight had just begun. His hand gripped the console tighter as the quiet tension filled the room, its weight thickening the air. "Deploy the second wave of interceptors," Kessler barked, his voice low but unyielding. The officers at their stations didn't hesitate, their fingers dancing across controls with the precision of soldiers marching into battle. The air around them felt charged, as though the ship itself were holding its breath waiting for the first strike. Outside, the black void of space remained still, punctuated only by the fleeting flashes of distant stars. The ship's vibrations seemed to reverberate through Kessler's bones, steady but deliberate. The temperature in the room had dropped slightly, the coolness pressing against his skin, mingling with the sweat forming on the back of his neck. The metallic tang of the air was sharp, cutting through the atmosphere, reminding him that this moment was just as volatile as the vastness outside. The first salvo of missiles launched from their positions, invisible to the Empress's fleet for a split second, before a violent explosion split the calm. A ripple of heat cut through the cold. The sonic boom of destruction, muted in the emptiness of space, only felt as pressure building behind the crew's eyes. The first wave had been neutralized, but the enemy was no fool. Kessler could almost sense the calculated fury radiating from the Empress, her ships now regrouping, adapting to their newly disrupted surroundings. "They're recalibrating their sensors," the officer at the communication station reported, her voice tight, edged with concern. "They've already begun countermeasures." Kessler's jaw tightened as the reality sank in. The Empress wasn't done yet. This wasn't a battle they could win with one stroke. It would be a war of attrition. He shot a quick glance at the officer standing beside him, his subordinate whose face betrayed no fear, only the sharp focus that mirrored Kessler's own. "Brace for the next phase," Kessler ordered. "This is only the beginning." The officers moved like clockwork, their hands steady despite the growing intensity of the situation. Kessler could hear the muffled clicks of data streams filling the silence between his commands, each piece of information adding to the weight in his chest. The room felt colder now, as the systems processed at an accelerating pace. The air, though devoid of sound, felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were pressing in with the weight of impending conflict. A small beep from the communication station broke the tension. The officer's face darkened as she looked at the incoming transmission. "It's the Empress," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "She's sending a message." Kessler didn't need to ask. He knew exactly what was coming. He nodded to her sharply. "Put it through." The screen flared to life, the image of the Empress appearing in harsh contrast against the blackness of space. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes cold, but the words that followed were unmistakable. "You think your tricks will save you?" she said, her voice cutting through the air with chilling authority. "I will destroy you all. Humanity's time is over." Her words hung in the air long after the transmission ended. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with the weight of the Empress's promise. The moment felt suspended, as though the entire galaxy was holding its breath. Kessler's hand curled into a fist at his side, his mind racing. The battle was far from over, and the stakes had just escalated. "Get ready," Kessler said, his voice low but resolute. "She's coming, and this time we won't have the luxury of surprises." Kessler's gaze remained locked on the screen where the Empress's image had vanished, her threat echoing through the now tense atmosphere of the command center. The air was thick, each officer's breath mixing with the sharp cold that snaked around the room, a physical reminder of the chilling promise delivered by their foe. The silence was broken only by the soft, almost imperceptible buzz of equipment and the distant low murmur of the crew outside the command chamber, their voices a subdued soundtrack to the brewing storm. "Track their movements," Kessler ordered, his voice a calm command that belied the storm of calculations racing through his mind. "Every ship, every possible trajectory. We can't afford to be outflanked." The tactical officer nodded, her fingers a blur over the console, the glow of the screen painting her face in shades of blue and green. The feedback from the sensors was not just data. It was a pulse, the heartbeat of the enemy fleet growing steadily closer, each beat a countdown to the inevitable clash. Kessler could feel the ship beneath him, the slight vibration of the hull transmitting the vast, silent expanse that cradled them. It was a deceptive piece, one shattered by the reality of the visual on his screen. A flurry of activity, the enemy advancing in a relentless tide, their formations tight and deliberate. "Sir, their main armada has shifted course slightly. Heading 047 Mark III. They're accelerating," reported a young officer, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. Kessler's eyes flicked to the young man, noting the tension in his shoulders, the slight clench of his jaw. The crew trusted him, their faith a tangible force that he felt obliged to honor. "Adjust our positioning. Keep our primary fleet hidden but ready, and get me a direct line to all ship captains. It's time we discuss the real plan," Kessler responded, turning back to the tactical display. The movements of the alien fleet were a dance of death, one he intended to lead. As the orders were relayed, the subtle taste of recycled air filled Kessler's lungs, the faint metallic tang blending with the undercurrent of tension that permeated the command center. The light hum of the ship's core systems was a constant reminder of the fragile barrier between them and the vacuum of space, a barrier that he was determined not to breach. He moved to a private alcove, the communication screen blinking to life as the faces of his captains appeared, each one set against the backdrop of their own command centers. "We knew this wasn't going to be easy," Kessler began, his tone firm yet reassuring. "The Empress will use everything she has, but so will we. It's not just our lives on the line, it's the future of humanity. We have one shot at this. Let's make it count." Nods of agreement met his statement, the shared resolve of his captains fortifying his own. As the transmission ended, Kessler felt the weight of command settle around him, a mantle he bore with a grim determination. Returning to the main floor, he found his crew ready, the earlier tension now honed into a sharp focus. "Prepare for engagement," he commanded, his voice resonating through the command center. The response was immediate, each officer springing into action, their movements precise and efficient. Outside, the darkness of space awaited, a canvas soon to be painted with the light of battle. Kessler watched, his heart steady, his mind clear. The game of cat and mouse was over. Now it was time to face the beast. As the battle approached, the ship bristled with a contained urgency, a taut readiness that vibrated through the metal decks. Kessler's command was now the heart from which all orders pulsed, each directive sharpening the focus of his crew. The ambient lights of the command center cast stark shadows, flickering slightly as the ship powered up its weapon systems, the energy surge a silent herald of the coming storm. "Visual on enemy Vanguard," called out the surveillance officer, her voice cutting through the low murmur of the room. The main screen flickered, transitioning from the strategic map to the live feed from the front lines. The image that unfolded was stark, a formation of the Empress's fleet, their ships arrayed in a menacing phalanx, their hulls reflecting the cold, distant light of nearby stars. Kessler stepped closer, his gaze locked on the formation. "Magnify section Delta 4, he instructed, pointing to a cluster of ships that seemed slightly out of sync with the rest. As the image zoomed, the irregularity became clear, a gap in the formation, possibly an entry point. His mind raced, plotting trajectories and firing solutions, the tactical part of his brain mapping out possibilities. "Ready the Shadow Wing," Kessler ordered, his decision made. The elite fighter unit was notorious for their swift, precise strikes, perfect for exploiting such weaknesses. The air felt electric, the faint vibration of the ship's engines blending with the sharper thrums of fighters launching from the hangar bays. The scent of ionized air filled the command center, a byproduct of the energy weapons charging, mixed with the underlying ever-present odor of lubricant and metal. As the fighters departed, silence momentarily reclaimed the command center, a heavy, anticipative quiet that settled over the crew like a cloak. Kessler's eyes remained fixed on the screen, watching as the small icons representing the Shadow Wing darted toward the enemy. The first clash was silent. A dance of deadly intent played out in the vacuum of space. The fighters weaved through the enemy formation, their movements a blur of precision and speed. Explosions blossomed in silent beauty, each burst of light a testament to their success and a grim reminder of the stakes. "Direct hit on secondary engines of their lead ship," reported a tactical officer, his voice a mix of relief and tension. The enemy's formation faltered, the disruption evident even without audio, a visual symphony of chaos and destruction. Kessler's focus didn't waver, his senses fully attuned to the battle unfolding. He could almost feel the distant reverberations of the ship's artillery, the faint echo of explosions resonating through the ship's hull. His taste buds registered the slight tang of adrenaline, sharp and metallic, as he prepared for the next phase. "Bring the main fleet to bear," he commanded, his voice resolute. "Target their flanks. Use the disruption. No mercy." As the fleet moved into position, the strategic overlay on the screen shifted, new data streams flowing in, updating in real time. The ship shuddered gently, a silent testament to its raw power being unleashed. Kessler watched, his expression stone-like as the battle lines were redrawn with each salvo fired. The Empress had thought her fleet invincible, her power unchallenged. Today, Kessler intended to teach her the cost of her arrogance. The mystery of humanity's resilience and ingenuity would unfold before her, a lesson delivered in fire and steel. As the fierce onslaught continued, Kessler observed the chaos unfurling against the backdrop of the cosmos. The relentless advance of humanity's fleet pressed the Empress's armada further into disarray, the once formidable enemy now scrambling to reassert its formation. Each explosion from the alien ships was a burst of silent fireworks, a testament to the effectiveness of the human strategy. In the command center, the air was thick with anticipation, each officer poised at their station, eyes locked on the screens displaying the battle's progress. The sharp scent of overheated electronics mingled with the more subtle notes of cold metal and sweat, a tangible reminder of the high stakes at play. Kessler's senses were on high alert, the slightly bitter taste of adrenaline tingling on his tongue as he issued commands with clinical precision. "Press the advantage, target their heavy cruisers, disable their capabilities to regroup," Kessler directed, his voice calm but carrying a steely urgency. His crew responded in kind, their actions swift and decisive, the flurry of activity around him a well-orchestrated symphony of war tactics. As the human fleet continued its assault, the stars seemed to flicker and wane, overshadowed by the bursts of light from exploding ships and the brilliant paths of ion cannons firing in rhythmic succession. The deep cold of space contrasted sharply with the heat generated by the ship's overworked systems. The walls of the command center warmed to the touch, a stark reminder of the battle raging just beyond their hull. Suddenly, a new element appeared on the tactical display, a cluster of enemy ships breaking formation, heading toward a nebulous sector of space. "They're making a run for it," noted the navigation officer, her voice tense as she traced their path with a finger on the map. Kessler's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "They're not retreating. They're regrouping, or it's a feint. Launch scouts, follow them, but keep your distance. I want eyes on their movements without risking our fleet." The command was relayed, and a small squadron of scout ships detached from the main fleet, their movements sleek and nearly silent as they slipped through the stars, a ghostly presence in the cosmic vastness. The gentle vibration of the ship under Kessler's feet was a constant reminder of the ongoing conflict, the stakes higher with each passing moment. Kessler turned back to the main screen, watching as the scouts relayed real-time images of the enemy ships entering a dense asteroid field. "They're using it for cover," he murmured, his mind racing through potential traps and ambushes lying in wait. Prepare to deploy mines. Seal off their exit routes from the asteroid field. If they want cover, we'll bury them in it, Kessler decided, his command unequivocal. The tactical team set to work immediately, coordinates plotted with meticulous care to avoid any collateral damage to their own forces. As the mines were deployed, the quiet in the command center was almost palpable, each officer holding their breath, waiting for the outcome. Kessler felt the ship's subtle shift as it settled into position, the smell of ionized particles wafting through the air, a byproduct of the ship's heavy weapons discharging in controlled, deadly bursts. The screen showed the mines floating silently into the asteroid field, hidden among the rocks, waiting for the unsuspecting enemy to trigger a catastrophic trap. Kessler watched, his expression unreadable, knowing that the next few moments could determine the course of the battle, and possibly the war. As the mines nestled into the asteroid field's shadowy crevices, a tense silence fell over Kessler's command center. The crew's eyes were glued to the screens, watching for the first sign of disruption among the enemy ranks, a signal that the trap had sprung. The air was thick with the sharp scent of anticipation, the walls of the command center almost echoing the distant, silent thunder of potential explosions. "Their ships are entering the target zone," announced the surveillance officer, her voice a subdued whisper against the low buzz of the ship's operational systems. On the screen, the first of the enemy vessels, sleek and menacing even in retreat, drifted unsuspectingly towards the hidden danger. Kessler stood rigid, his gaze fixed on the display, every muscle tensed as if he were out there in the void, amidst the stars and threats. The temperature in the room had dropped, the ship's climate systems straining under the dual burden of warfare and stealth, causing a slight chill to sweep through the space, prickling the skin of everyone present. "Wait for it," Kessler murmured, a mix of command and anticipation in his tone. His fingers gripped the console, the cold surface a stark contrast to the heat from the electronic displays radiating against his face. Suddenly, the first mine detonated, the explosion a brilliant flare of light that illuminated the asteroid field. A chain reaction began, each blast a carefully calculated symphony orchestrated by Kessler's commands. The enemy ships, caught off guard, scrambled to navigate the deadly terrain, their sleek forms twisting and turning in a desperate attempt to escape the chaos. From the command center, the explosions were silent fireworks, beautiful yet deadly, their glow reflected in the wide eyes of the crew. The smell of ozone now spiked through the air, a byproduct of the electrical discharges from the ship's weapon systems firing continuously, the sharp odor mingling with the metallic tang of the ship's interior. "Direct hits on multiple targets," the weapons officer reported, his voice steady but filled with restrained exhilaration. "Their formation is breaking." Kessler nodded, allowing himself a brief moment of satisfaction before his strategic mind kicked back in. "Deploy the drones for cleanup. Target any ships that attempt to retreat from the debris field," he ordered, his voice clear and devoid of triumph. Victory was not yet theirs, and each decision layered upon the next, a delicate stack of dominoes that could topple with the slightest miscalculation. As the drones launched, their silent sortie a ghostly dance through the cosmos, Kessler turned his attention back to the broader battlefield. The main screen shifted scenes, now showing the broader array of the Empress's fleet, which had paused, their advance halted by the unexpected resistance. "Sir, the Empress is recalibrating her strategy," noted the tactical officer, her eyes flicking back and forth between her data pads and the main screen. "She's pulling back the main fleet. Looks like she's preparing for a larger counterstrike." Kessler's expression hardened at the news. The mystery of the Empress's capabilities hung over them like a dark cloud. "Keep a close watch on her movements. Inform me of any changes immediately," he commanded, turning to view the star-studded battlefield on the screen, his mind already racing through potential scenarios. This was the calm before the storm, a brief respite to gather strength for the confrontation that was undoubtedly on the horizon. The silent vastness of space around them seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move in this deadly chess game where the stakes were nothing less than the fate of humanity. In the quiet aftermath of the skirmish, the stars seemed to regain their luminescence, casting a serene glow over the void that belied the tension still simmering aboard Kessler's command ship. His crew monitored the vast array of screens with hawk-like vigilance, the previous explosions having given way to a deceptive calm. Kessler stood, arms behind his back, his gaze piercing the holographic displays that showed the scattered remnants of the enemy's maneuver. "Updates?" Kessler's voice sliced through the silence, prompting the communications officer to step forward, her face illuminated by the soft light of her console. "The Empress's fleet is regrouping beyond the asteroid field, sir. They seem to be hesitating." Her report was concise, her tone imbued with a mix of caution and curiosity. "It appears they didn't expect such resistance." Kessler's lips thinned into a grim line. "Or they're planning something we haven't seen yet. Keep scanning. I want constant updates on their configurations." As his command resonated through the room, the subtle scent of coffee drifted from the corner where a machine quietly brewed, a small comfort against the sterile chill that filled the air. He turned to glance at the tactical advisor, a middle-aged officer whose calm demeanor had weathered many battles. "What's your read, Mason?" Officer Mason adjusted the datapad in his hand, his eyes not leaving the screen. "It's a stall, sir. She's buying time to deploy something bigger. We should prepare for a significant offensive." Kessler nodded, absorbing the analysis. "Prepare all units for a possible heavy assault. And get the engineers to boost shield integrity. We'll need to be ready to withstand whatever she throws at us." As the commands were dispatched, the subtle shift in the crew's energy was palpable. The previous quiet was replaced by a low murmur of activity, the clinking of coffee cups, the soft tapping of keyboards, and the muted footsteps on the metal floor filled the space with life. Outside, the cosmos danced in its timeless rhythm, the darkness punctuated by the distant twinkle of celestial bodies. Suddenly, the main screen flickered and zoomed in on a new formation of ships making their way from behind the asteroid field. They were larger, heavily armored, and unlike any design previously catalogued in the Empress's fleet. "Unknown vessels detected," announced the surveillance officer, her voice tight with tension. "Configuration unknown? Armaments unknown?" Kessler stepped closer, analyzing the screen. The ships were sleek, dark, and menacing, sharks against the backdrop of deep space. "Speculate. I need options," he demanded, turning to his tactical team. Mason frowned, observing the unfamiliar ships. "If I had to guess, sir, those might be experimental, possibly equipped with tech we haven't encountered before." The mystery of these new adversaries sent a ripple of unease through the room. Kessler felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. His resolve hardened. This was no time for fear. "All right, we adapt. We always do. Signal all units to maintain distance but stay alert. I want a full spectral analysis on those ships. Find a weakness." As his crew sprang into action, Kessler's thoughts raced. The Empress was indeed full of surprises, but he was determined to meet her challenge head-on. The game of cat and mouse had evolved into a standoff, and he was not about to blink first. As Kessler watched the spectral analysis unfold, the glow from the monitors cast ghostly hues across his stoic face. The command center was awash in low blue light, the air tinged with a trace of burnt insulation, an unwelcome reminder of the systems straining under the increased demands of war. The crew's focus was palpable, a tangible current that flowed through the room, energizing and tense. "Find anything." Kessler's voice cut sharply through the concentrated silence, directed at a technician who was rapidly keying data into a diagnostic tool. "Sir, it's peculiar," the technician began, adjusting his glasses as he turned to face Kessler. "The hull composition of these ships, it's unlike anything we've cataloged, and there's a pattern in the energy emissions that I can't quite decode. It's irregular, almost as if it's meant to be cloaked from our standard scans," Kessler finished for him, his brow furrowing in thought. "They're masking their true capabilities." The revelation hung in the air, heavy like the gravity of a star, pulling at the edges of Kessler's mind with implications he dared not ignore. He moved back to the central display, his gaze lingering on the images of the unknown vessels, their sleek, dark forms a blot against the cosmos. "Enhance the IR spectrum. Let's see what they're hiding," he commanded, turning to another officer who nodded and immediately adjusted the settings. The screen flickered, then stabilized to reveal subtle outlines of energy signatures that had been invisible before, a mosaic of power and technology that painted a grim picture of their potential firepower. "Sir, we should consider pulling back," suggested Mason, stepping beside Kessler. His voice was low, almost hesitant, reflecting the gravity of their situation. "Regroup and analyze this new threat from a safer distance." Kessler considered this, the metallic taste of the ship's recycled air filling his mouth as he mulled over his options. His hand came up to his chin, a gesture of deep thought. "And give them the field? No, we hold our position. Prepare all units for a defensive maneuver. I want cross-flanking routes ready for all squadrons." The orders were relayed, the sound of fingers tapping rapidly on keyboards, a staccato rhythm in the otherwise quiet room. The tension seemed to thicken, almost visible in the air, as the crew anticipated the next move in this deadly dance. The Empress's ships began to move, their formation tight and deliberate, advancing slowly through the star-studded black. Kessler watched, his senses heightened, every detail of the enemy's approach burning into his memory. The faint vibrations of the ship under his feet, the distant echo of crew members moving in the corridors, and the sharp scent of coffee someone had brought into the command center, all painted a surreal picture of calm before the inevitable storm. Suddenly the main screen blipped with a new transmission, a signal weak and garbled, but unmistakably from the Empress's flagship. "Put it through," Kessler ordered, steeling himself for what might be another bluff or a genuine parley. The screen crackled to life, showing the Empress's imposing figure, her eyes gleaming with a mix of resolve and a hint of respect. "Commander Kessler," her voice resonated clearly through the command center, "you've proven more resourceful than I anticipated. Let's parley. There's much to discuss." Kessler's eyes narrowed, the mystery of her intentions another layer in the complex web of galactic warfare. "On my terms," he responded firmly, his mind already racing through the scenarios her proposal could entail. This could be a pivotal moment, a chance to turn the tide, or a trap, equally poised to spring. Kessler stared at the screen, analyzing the Empress's offer of parley. His mind raced through potential outcomes, each scenario meticulously evaluated for risks and rewards. The stale taste of the ship's recycled air seemed more pronounced as the weight of decision pressed upon him. "Prepare a secure channel. I want every word recorded and analyzed," he instructed, his voice steady, betraying none of the tension coiling within him. The communications officer nodded, her hands moving with practiced efficiency to set up a heavily encrypted link. "We'll use the secondary command room for the discussion. Full surveillance, no exceptions," Kessler continued, turning to Mason, who had been silently observing the exchange. "And get the tech team ready. If this is a ruse, I want a counter-strategy in place within minutes." As they prepared, Kessler felt the subtle shift in the ship's atmosphere. The usual undercurrents of machine oil and antiseptic were now overlaid with a sharp edge of ozone, a byproduct of the high-energy systems being pushed to their limits. He walked to the secondary command room, each step resounding slightly against the metal floor, the sound a steady drumbeat to the rhythm of his thoughts. The room was dimly lit, the walls lined with screens displaying various data streams and diagnostics. Kessler took his place at the central table, the surface cold and unyielding beneath his touch. Mason stood to his side, a silent sentinel. As the screen flickered to life, the Empress appeared once more, her countenance composed, her eyes sharp. "Commander Kessler, I propose a ceasefire. Your tactics have been impressive. There is much we could achieve together," she began, her voice smooth, almost coaxing. Kessler's eyes narrowed slightly. "And why would you seek a ceasefire now, Empress, when moments ago you were set on our annihilation?" The Empress smiled thinly. "Let's just say I've reconsidered the potential costs, and I recognize opportunity when I see it." Kessler paused, letting the silence stretch between them, his mind sifting through her words. "An alliance," he stated flatly, Not a question, but a summation of her unspoken suggestion. Exactly. Think of it, Commander. Together we could dominate this sector, unchallenged, she replied, her tone suggesting mutual benefits, but her eyes revealing a sharper, more calculating intent. Kessler leaned back, his gaze flickering briefly to a side screen showing a real-time analysis of the Empress's speech patterns and potential psychological tells. "I will consider your proposal," he said finally, his voice devoid of commitment. "But actions speak louder than words, Empress. I'll need proof of your sincerity." "A wise precaution, Commander. I will provide you with coordinates to a depot containing supplies that would be beneficial to your fleet. Consider it a gesture of good faith." As the transmission ended, Kessler turned to Mason, his expression unreadable. "Prepare a recon squad. Verify her claims. But maintain battle readiness. This could still be a diversion." Mason nodded, already moving to relay the orders. Kessler's eyes returned to the screen. The potential alliance a new variable in the complex calculus of war. His strategy needed to be adaptable, realistic yet daring, ready to exploit opportunities but prepared for traps. As the ship hummed quietly around him, the deep silence of space outside seemed to watch and wait, a vast witness to the chess game unfolding within its starry realm. Kessler paced slowly in the secondary command room, the cold metal underfoot resonating with each step, the dim light cast shadows that danced along the walls, echoing the uncertainty of the current truce. He stopped, turning to face the main screen, where the coordinates provided by the Empress were displayed. "Are the recon squads ready?" Kessler asked, his voice cutting through the quiet tension that filled the room. "Yes, sir. They're prepped and can launch on your command," replied Lieutenant Harrow, a competent young officer whose steady demeanor had proven invaluable in times of crisis. His hands moved efficiently over the control panel, setting up the final checks for the mission. "Launch them," Kessler commanded, his eyes not leaving the screen. As he watched the blips representing the recon squads disappear from the base, a mix of anticipation and wariness settled in his chest. The room filled with the subtle scent of cold electronics, a reminder of the myriad of systems at work beneath the surface. Kessler inhaled deeply, the filtered air tasting slightly stale but familiar. He turned to view another screen, which displayed live feed from the recon ships. The stars passed by in a blur, the vastness of space enveloping them in its silent embrace. "Keep communications open. I want updates every 5 minutes," Kessler instructed, settling into the commander's chair. The fabric was cool against his skin, slightly rough, grounding him as he watched the mission unfold. The recon squads made swift progress, their ships equipped for speed and stealth. As they approached the coordinates, the tension in the command room escalated. Every officer was acutely aware of the stakes. This could be a pivotal moment in their conflict with the Empress. The first images from the depot came through, the cameras on the recon ships transmitting back to the ship. The depot was larger than expected, nestled between 2 asteroid clusters, its metal surfaces dull and pitted from micrometeorite impacts. The site was stark against the backdrop of space, a hidden trove that could indeed tip the scales if it held what the Empress had promised. "Sir, we're approaching the depot. Sensors are picking up significant material quantities inside," reported Harrow, his voice a mixture of surprise and caution. "It looks legitimate." Kessler nodded, his mind racing through the implications. "Scan for traps. I want a full sweep before anyone goes inside." As the scans proceeded, the silence was palpable, everyone waiting for the results that would either confirm their suspicions or offer a new ally in the war. Finally, Harrow turned back to Kessler, a slight relief in his eyes. "No traps detected, sir. It's clear." "Good. Secure the depot. I want everything valuable transferred to our cargo holds," Kessler ordered, allowing himself a brief moment of relief. Yet the strategic part of his brain was already moving forward, pondering the Empress's game. "Keep our guard up," he added, his gaze drifting back to the stars outside. "This isn't over yet." The planning for the return trip began immediately, Kessler overseeing every detail. They needed to ensure the newly acquired resources made it back safely without falling into a trap. The payoff of this mission could indeed be substantial, but Kessler knew better than to assume they were out of danger. The game of war was complex, and the Empress was undoubtedly planning her next move. The cargo holds of Kessler's flagship brimmed with supplies from the depot. The material gain significant, but the strategic advantage even greater. Yet the weight of a looming confrontation pressed heavily upon the atmosphere within the command center. The crew moved with a precision that spoke of urgency and the readiness of soldiers on the brink of a decisive battle. As Kessler reviewed the deployment plans, his mind was a sharp blade cutting through possibilities and probabilities. The air was electric, charged with the tension of impending conflict. The distant stars outside the viewport provided a serene yet stark backdrop to the internal storm brewing within the flagship. "Prepare all units for the final stand," Kessler commanded, his voice resonating deeply in the quiet of the command center. Lieutenant Harrow nodded, his face a mask of resolve as he relayed the orders. Each member of the crew felt the gravity of the moment, the silence of space around them, a vast echo chamber for the heartbeats of warriors. The Empress, true to her word, had not attacked during the retrieval mission, but Kessler knew that the real test was forthcoming. The anticipation was a palpable force, threading through the corridors of the ship, filling the air with a sharp edge. As they approached the rendezvous point for the final confrontation, Kessler's gaze fixed on the holographic displays showing the Empress's fleet positioning. The setup was tactical, each of her ships a chess piece in a game that had spanned the breadth of the galaxy. "This ends today," Kessler murmured to himself, then turned to address his crew. "This battle will determine the fate of humanity. We stand not just as warriors, but as defenders of our right to exist, to thrive among the stars. Today we show the Empress that humanity will not bow down, that our spirit and our will are as unbreakable as the void is vast." The crew's response was a unified nod, their faces set with determination. Kessler's words had kindled a fire, a burning resolve that lit up the command center like a beacon. The Empress's fleet appeared on the horizon, a dark silhouette against the cosmic canvas. Kessler's flagship moved to meet them, the other ships flanking it in a meticulously planned formation. The silence was a tightrope stretched to its limit, about to snap under the tension of the imminent clash. As the fleets neared, a transmission crackled through, the Empress's face appearing on the screen. "Commander Kessler, do you really believe your ragtag fleet can defeat mine?" Kessler's eyes didn't waver. "It's not the fleet, Empress, but the resolve of those who command it. You will find that humanity's resolve is forged in the core of stars, unyielding and burning ever bright." The screen went blank, the finality of the moment settling in like the cold of deep space. The battle commenced, a dance of light and shadow, as beams of energy crossed the void, meeting shields and armor in bursts of silent, brilliant fury. The conflict was fierce, both sides giving as well as they got. But as the battle wore on, the Empress's forces began to falter, her ships breaking formation under the relentless assault of Kessler's fleet. As the tide turned, Kessler stood firm, his voice clear and resolute. "For humanity, for our future." It was a rallying cry that echoed through the ship, a wave of courage that swept over every crew member. The final moments of the battle were a testament to human tenacity, strategy, and the indomitable spirit that refused to yield. When the dust settled, it was Kessler's fleet that emerged victorious, the Empress's ships retreating, her ambition thwarted. The victory was monumental, not just in terms of the battle, but for the message it sent across the galaxy. Humanity had not just survived, it had prevailed. As the remnants of the Empress's fleet vanished into the cosmos, a profound silence enveloped Kessler's flagship. The victory was not just a tactical achievement, but a resounding declaration of humanity's resilience and determination. The crew, many of whom had braced for a far grimmer outcome, now allowed themselves a collective breath of relief and tentative celebration. Kessler stood at the forefront of the command center, his eyes surveying the stars beyond. The tension that had gripped his features eased slightly, yet his posture remained vigilant, a commander in every line and angle of his stance. "We did it," Lieutenant Harrow said, his voice breaking through the quiet, carrying a mix of disbelief and pride. "We actually did it." Kessler turned, his gaze sweeping over his crew, seeing the mixture of exhaustion and elation etched on their faces. "Yes, we did," he acknowledged, allowing the briefest smile to cross his lips. "But it was no miracle. It was your hard work and bravery that turned the tide. Today, each of you has ensured that humanity's light will not be extinguished." The command center erupted into a subdued cheer, the sound a soft echo in the vastness of their ship. Kessler's words had ignited something within them, a fierce joy and a renewed sense of purpose. "Let this victory serve as a message," Kessler continued, his voice gaining strength as he addressed his crew. "Not just to the Empress, but to all who might still doubt what we are capable of. We are humanity. We adapt, we persevere, and above all, we stand together." The moment was crystalline, a point in time that would be etched in the annals of human history. The crew of Kessler's ship, and indeed all of humanity, would remember this as the day not when they avoided defeat, but when they asserted their place in the galaxy. As celebrations began to ripple through the ship, Kessler excused himself, stepping into the observatory deck, a quiet space where the vastness of space could be viewed in its most raw and beautiful form. The stars shone brightly, galaxies spun in their ancient rhythms, and for a moment, Kessler allowed himself to feel the weight of what they had achieved. Looking out at the endless expanse, he spoke into the quiet, his words for no one but the stars and the silent witnesses of space. "Today we raged against the dying of the light, and we were victorious." In the days that followed, news of the victory spread across human territories, each broadcast, each transmission carrying the tale of the battle that had turned the tide. Humanity had not only survived an existential threat, but had emerged stronger, their spirits bolstered by the undeniable proof of their own capabilities and resolve. As peace negotiations began, with Kessler at the helm, a new era dawned, an era of cautious optimism and renewed determination. The Empress, humbled and curbed, would think twice before underestimating humanity again. And across the worlds, in ships and stations, in homes both humble and grand, people looked up at the stars and felt a new kinship with the cosmos, for in their hearts burned the unquenchable fire of human spirit, fierce and free, a force as mighty and enduring as the stars themselves.